So the act of immigration, which is moving from one country of birth to another country with the aim of settling there, is not new by no means. Actually, it is very old and goes back to the very origin of the humankind, as you can see in this slide. One of the most recognized theories about the origin of Homo sapiens tells us that he appeared in East Africa more than 200,000 years ago, and then our ancestors spread later, more or less 100,000 years ago. They spread all over the world, as you can see following the red line. And the reason why they spread all over the world can be an object of a question. Why did they move? Why didn't they stay where they were? And the reason, actually, we don't know exactly. There is some theories that archaeologists told us, and partly they probably moved for changes in the climate, which is very common also today, as you know. They have to follow their food because they follow the animals and the plants that were food for them. So when they didn't find appropriate and apt climate for them or for the animal who live in the place, they have to go in another place. And so they start this migration. But maybe it's not the only reason. Another reason could be that there were conflicts and wars that forced them to go in another place. So they have to fled maybe from some dangers or conflicts. And there is also another reason that we have to keep in mind generally when we speak of migration. Maybe they wanted to explore new places. Maybe they were driven by the curiosity, the desire to go beyond their limits. And the limits could be represented in their view by the next hills. What is there over these hills that I see there? Or the next mountains, or the lake, or the sea? All the natural places that they see around them, and the curiosity to see what is beyond them. And curiosity is an intrinsic characteristic of human beings. And I think that some of you know it very well because maybe some international students went here also because they wanted to see another place, another culture, another way of living. So we could ask, what is the difference between this form of primitive immigration and the modern one, which is the object of this course? So which is the difference from our ancestors who moved all over the world, these pioneers of immigration, even if they were not called immigrants, and the movement of people in our era, starting from the Second World War II. If you look at the reasons, you couldn't find a lot of differences. Because I think you know, everyone knows that people now sometimes move because they want to find a better place to live in terms of quality of life. Sometimes they have to flee from war or conflicts, again. And sometimes they are forced to leave their place of residence because of unsustainable environmental condition, and which is more and more frequent because of floods, because of droughts, because of earthquakes. So the reasons, as you can see, are not so different. So the question is, which is the difference? Because I think that it's intuitive that there is some difference between this image and this other one. So the difference, in my opinion, it's not just my opinion, lies in the fences control, borders control, in border patrol, in the walls. And maybe we can recap all these things in a word, which is very symbolic, and it is the passport. The difference between the primitive and the modern migration lies in the passport. I'm not saying that borders are a 20th century invention, of course. But I can say that until the 20th century, the movement of people was relatively easier than now. Even passports are not a modern invention. Actually, it's an ancient invention, and maybe they date back to the Longobards, so really very old invention. But if we look at passport in the modern form, as a document in the standard format, which is one of the first passports, but more or less the information are the same. So a document with the standard format and photos. This kind of document began to spread after the First World War, and it's the date of this passport, when many countries began to require official identification for security reasons. So the issue of security became central. With the introduction of passports, immigration became much more regulated and controlled. States now, since the invention of the passport, now more than some decades ago because of the technologies developed very much, they can know who is entering their territory. And most of all, they can select immigrants. They can select who can enter and who can't. And what you see here is the Schengen area. It's important because in Europe, in 1985, there was an agreement that I think you know, very important, which is the Schengen Agreement, initially just from few countries, 5 countries, and then 10 years later, it entered in force with more countries, and that's the current situation. As you can see, this convention does not include only European Union members, but also other countries, and at the same time, Ireland is not included. And it was not included also the United Kingdom when it was part of the European Union. And the reason, I think that you know, which is the reason United Kingdom also had a kind of Euroscepticism even when they were part of the European Union, and they deemed, when they were part of the Union, they deemed really crucial for them to control the border, so they didn't want to sign the agreement. What I'm showing you this image, because through this agreement, a number of countries, which are independent, autonomous countries, decided in some way to abolish the border, or better, the border within this area, not the border at all. So people can travel without any border controls within this area. And it's a kind of revolution, if you think. It's happened just in this area of the world and in any other area. This is a revolution. This is very important because it's a kind of acknowledgement that in a globalized world, it's impossible that just the goods travel freely, but also the people need to have some free in moving from one part to another. But actually, these kind of rules is in force just for people within this area. Because for people coming from outside the European Union, the situation, as you know, is really, really different. And there is a kind of fortress for the people coming from other area. Not for all the people, we know, for some people. And which are these people? People from the global south. Because people from the global north are usually welcome. So actually, recently, it's the barrier, the border controls, and the difficulty in coming in a country in the European Union is not just an issue of the passport, because another barrier was added in the 1980s. And this barrier is the visa. So I guess that some of you at least know very well these tools. So to enter in some countries, not all the countries, it depends, and it depends from the relation between the different countries, but usually you need a visa because the passport is not enough. And obtaining a valid visa cannot be easy. Sometimes it's really very difficult or even impossible. So freedom of movement, as you can see, has become a scarce resource. One scholar, the name is Torpe, in 2000, has noted that nation states are becoming the main actor, and I quote, in monopolizing the legitimate means of movement. And they do so they monopolize the legitimate means of movement precisely through the global system of passports and visa that regulate the access to national territories. The regulation of immigration that we can also call border policies and border practices, and we will see more detail next week. We will have a class on border controls. This regulation has the function of filtering immigration, I mentioned before. So has the role of favoring desired or needed, and sometimes it's not the same thing, immigrants and immigration, and blocking some categories of people on the move. So I would ask you really briefly, which immigrants do you think are wanted and or needed? I take this figure where a colleague tried to categorize exactly the wanted and unwanted migrants using these two criteria. The distinction is a little bit not so, I mean, you can, sometimes there is some overlapping about the two criteria, but the first criteria is welcome, the second is wanted. What is the difference? Take, for example, refugees, because with refugees, the example is very clear. They are welcome, not in the sense that governments are happy to have refugees in their society, but because they are in some way forced to host refugees for international agreements that they sign. But if you see if they are wanted, for example, from public opinion or also from the labor market, not so much. If you see the highly qualified immigrants and the so-called mobile people, we will explain later the definition of mobile people, these are welcome and wanted, as some of you said before. And then we have some people at the opposite that are not welcome and they are not wanted, because anyone wants extremist or marginalized group because they are perceived as a danger for security and a burden for welfare. That's the two big reasons because government and public opinion don't want this kind of people. And I also add this category, which is more general, of irregular immigrants, even if it's a category which needs some more specification, and we will see, because there are different kind of people in this label with the very different background and also very different legal status. Because being immigrants with an irregular background doesn't mean exactly having the same legal status. We will see next week with the presentation of irregular migration. And then the last category is the category which is not so much welcome from government because, again, they have the idea that having immigrants, hosting immigrants, could lead to lose consensus, which is very important for politicians. But at the same time, labor market sector want this kind of immigrants, especially in Italy. So immigrants with low qualification, like people who work in agriculture or in the care sector, which are a kind of job that many people from native from Europe don't want to do anymore. Okay, through this figure, we can analyze the concept of categories of entry. So what you see here is a sum of the categories of entry. This concept has proved crucial in regard of the definition about who is wanted, who is not wanted, or welcome. In the last decades, many entry categories were created, and they corresponded to different legal statuses and access to rights and social benefits. This categorization contributed to the creation of what Lydia Morris called civic stratification. Civic stratification means that some categories are associated with more rights than others. So you have a kind of ranking about who has more rights and who is on the top of the list and who is on the bottom of the list. And of course, you can imagine that highly qualified migrants are on the top, and asylum seeker, which is not refugees. It's the difference between these two categories. We will go in detail on this. Asylum seekers and, of course, irregular migrants are on the bottom of the rights in many different senses: social rights, civic rights, political rights, of course. The main categories of entry are economic migrants, family migrants, asylum seeker, refugees, irregular migrants, and also seasonal migrants, which are often the people who work in agriculture. And another point which is important to understand is that borders are not just national, because we are usually, we have the idea that borders are what is between one state and another. We think at the physical borders that when people try to pass. But if you think better, borders do not only correspond to the physical border, but also become, first of all, local. And they become local when some public actors, including public administration workers such as police and prefecture officers or registry office workers, when this kind of actors create obstacles to the rights of immigrants. Mayors, and here I refer to various research on the Italian case, and you can see here one example. Mayors have used municipal ordinances, and you can see where they used this kind of ordinances to restrict migrants and refugees access to a range of social rights. Usually we have the idea that at the local level there is more inclusion, because we think usually that at the local level the politicization is at the lower level than the national one, because we have to do with really practical things. So you need to do more things than to do politics in the sense of conflict. But it's not in this way, and especially in 2009 and 10 in Italy, when following a decree on security, one of the many decrees on security issued by a central right government, mayors, and not just mayors from a right-wing background, but also from left-wing background, started to issue this kind of ordinances who targeted immigrants in order to restrict their rights. And I give you some example. Here you have an ordinance on, let's say, car washers. So it was forbidden, it was an ordinance in Florence, 2009, more or less, this time. And it was forbidden to wash car glass at traffic lights on the streets. I think that many of you see these kind of things. In Florence for 1 year, and then it was removed, these ordinances. There was this kind of ban. Another example is the banning about begging, as you can see here. So it was not permitted to beg. And another one was the ban related to lying on benches, yes, in some places. So there was this kind of idea that it was not good for the decorum of the city to have people lying in the benches. You can say, but not just immigrants do this. It is true, but many of them do this. And so it's quite obvious that this kind of ordinances was targeted to them. Okay. There was also another example, the exclusion of immigrants from certain benefits, such as the baby bonus. It happened some years ago. Rent subsidies. All these measures are at the local level, so mayors and local council choices. So baby bonus, rent subsidies, contributions for medical or school expenses. So the local policies can be exclusionary and not just integrating. So the local level can also be the basis for exclusionary policy. Moreover, these administrative measures sometimes have been implemented in violation of national laws, so more strict than the national laws. And they did that, the mayors, in the name of emergency or in the name of urban security. Another example, and it's the last example, is when mayors obstruct the registration of immigrants or refugees at the civil registry office. And this kind of right is fundamental for obtaining the legal residence. So it's really a violation of a kind of human rights, because de facto they blocked their access to healthcare, social services, and even schooling for their children. Okay, but who is an international immigrant? Because it's not so taken for granted that we really know the definition of international immigrants. And actually, it's really different to find a shared definition of who is an international immigrant. There is a definition from the International Organization of Migration, IOM, in 2008, which define immigrants, international immigrant, like someone living outside their territory of origin, either regularly or irregularly, for a period of 12 months or more. Okay, we can say from this definition, we could think that it's clear because we have a time span, well-defined, 12 months. If you live in another place less, you are not an international migrant. If you live more, you are. But it's not so easy, because what about, for example, seasonal workers? In your opinion, they are not international immigrants? Actually, they are, and many of the decisions about immigration targeted also seasonal immigrants, seasonal workers. But it happens that they don't stay for 12 months in a place. Maybe they stay for 9 months for the season, could be agriculture or tourism season, and then they come back, and then they come again. So what I'm saying is that to define international immigrants is not easy because there's not an agreement between states about the representation of immigrants. And sometimes immigrants are represented, sometimes, and from some political parties, but it's really variable. They are represented as a solution. Solution for what? Solution, for example, for aging. It's really an important resource for aging, and Italy knows it. Actually, they don't know. We don't know, but it's in this way. It's an important, and even not a solution, but it can mitigate the problem of aging. Sometimes they are seen as a problem. Problem for what? We said before, problem for the welfare. They are a burden for the welfare state. Problem for security. of our city. But if you look at immigration in a more neutral sense, maybe you can also say that immigration is a natural component of a globalized society. If goods move from one place to another, one continent to another, why it's not natural to think that people move? So finally, who is an international immigrant? It's not so clear. We have this definition, but we know that it's not enough. It's not clear enough. And even if we don't go more in detail about the number today, but it's important to have this very general idea about how many immigrants in the world, because we have to know if they are, in our opinion, seeing the number that I'm showing to you, if they are too much, or maybe we would need more immigrants. That's the answer. The immigrants in the world in 2020, and I mean people who live in a country which is not their country of origin, were 281 million, and the rate on the total population was, as you can see, 3.60. So there are a lot of people, there are not a lot of people. We need some comparison, of course. If we compare in a temporal way, we can see that immigration is increasing. As you can see here in 1995 and in 2000, the number was, there was a lower number, so immigration is increasing. But if you think in a general way, 3.60% of the world population are not so much. And I'm more surprised that so few people move than the contrary. I don't know about you. But there is some reason on that. Also, there is the reason of the border control that we have already talking about. But there are also some reasons, different reasons. To immigrate is costly. It is costly. Maybe we don't think about it too much. If one people have to move from the place where he or she lived in another country, I mean a very far away country, as it happens in some migration, this person have to build completely another life, which is costly from an economic point of view, but it's costly also from a social and cultural point of view, and also emotional, psychological. There are a lot of costs which are implicated in the act of immigrating. I'm giving you a definition, the differences. I would like to highlight the difference between these two concepts, which are different categories of people. So the differences between mobility versus immigration. Maybe in the current discourse, we can think that they are synonymous. Actually, they could be synonymous. But when we think about mobility, tell me if it's true. We usually think about this kind of images. Is it true? So, which are these people? I don't know if you see very well, are people which are, as you can see, they are dressed. They are probably people with a high skill background. They are used to travel in the world, and yes, they exercise their rights of mobility. What do we think when we talk and we think about immigration? Which kind of images come to our mind? I think, and maybe you can say if it's true, we have this kind of images. One is this one that was already mentioned before. So people who works in a sector that, despite fundamental, is not so much recognized as the people who have an high skill profile. Or we have these kind of images. often related to women, so people who work in the care sector, and they are fundamental, but I mean, not so recognized at the social level. Needed, but not so welcome or wanted. Or this image. So people, desperate people in the precarious boat that try to arrive in Italy through the Mediterranean. And some people looking at this picture also think they don't deserve to come here. They don't have the rights to come here. They have to be moved away from this place. That's the difference between mobility versus immigration. And this difference, when we consider the European Union level, is the difference between mobile people with the European Union citizens. So when me, Italian, goes to France or Belgium or Netherlands, I am a mobile people, or you, of course. And also people is mobile when from the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan comes to Europe. They are mobile people. If one people comes from Kenya, Eritrea, this kind of Morocco, Tunisia, they are immigrant. We really change, we don't really, we are not aware, but we change world. I don't know, if you think about your way of speaking, it's difficult that you say from a friend from the United States who is here, oh, he's an immigrant. He's a people, foreign people, came here for studying, working, or whatever. What is a focusing event? Is a concept very much used in public policy analysis, introduced by Kingdom in a seminal work on agendas in 1985. A focusing event is an event that provides a kind of push to some items that were before in a kind of limbo, not considered by public, but by policymakers. And they, through this event, become considered. They make a kind of jump into active consideration. Usually a focusing event is a natural event like an earthquake, flood, a kind of catastrophe, but it can also be something related to politics, like there was in Italy in 1992. I don't know if you remember the big scandal of corruption named Tangentopoli. It can be considered a focusing event because after this event, there was a kind of turning from the First Republic to the Second Republic. Focusing event in immigration, there are many focusing events. Maybe the most recent is the so-called long summer of refugees. What's happened 10 years ago? 10 years ago. Over 1 million refugees and migrants entered Europe in this year, primarily from Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. This crisis peaked in the summer of 2015, when migration routes through the Balkans and across the Mediterranean saw an unprecedented influx. Initially, this event took the Chancellor Angela Merkel to a very open policy. I don't know if you remember, maybe you were really very young 10 years ago. The policy in German, First schaffen das, I don't know German. In English, the we can do it policy. So Angela Merkel basically said, Germany can take care of these people. They deserve to be welcome in our country, in our countries. Germany is ready. And this kind of policy led to 900,000 asylum seekers coming just in Germany. So the large majority of people, of refugees that year went there. But soon, 1 month later, this kind of open attitude, a very deep division started to be apparent within the European Union countries. And after many discussions and attempt to find some agreement about how to receive these people, how to distribute these people within different countries, because you maybe remember it's really kind of mantra from the right-wing party especially. All the people come in Italy, and at that time in Greece. Then now, because there was an agreement between Greece and Turkey in 2016, and so the immigration from Greece really not stopped, but almost. And so all the people comes in 2 countries, Greece and Italy, and the other country don't want to contribute to the burden of the reception of these people. The situation is a little bit complicated and articulated than this. We will see when we talk about asylum policy. But what I want to say now is that it was a really important event because in some way it unveiled the difficulty of European Union member states to find an agreement on a so important topic like immigration. And in addition, this event led to a reimposition of border control in the Schengen area, which is real, a sad thing, because a very important revolution like not having the borders, I said before at the beginning, was finally not possible to maintain this kind of important agreement. And even now, sometimes there is some reimposition of border controls between some countries. For example, recently there was the reimposition of borders control between Italy and Slovenia because of the arrival of people from the Balkan route. This crisis fueled far-right parties in Europe, even before there was this kind of increasing in consensus of the far-right parties. But this event really was a kind of boost about this, the consensus of these parties. And public debate became really polarized between some parties and some organizational and some NGO, which support the humanitarian obligation and try to convince government that the reception of these people was an obligation and they were to have a compliance regarding this human obligation. And the other part, which was the discourse of border security, which was a discourse very much used by populist parties. Okay, this was a kind of introduction where I put a lot of different issues just to give you an idea of what immigration can imply when we talk about immigration, the modern, the contemporary immigration. Now, briefly, I come to these 3 key words. So the first key word is crisis. Again, a very known image about the crisis of the 2015, when more than 1 million people entered in the European Union. What I want to say with this image and talking about crisis. Crisis from 2015 especially became the most used word associated to immigration. So everything when you talk about immigration is crisis. And some scholars talk about a crisification. So everything is a crisis if it's associated to immigration. No matter what are you talking about, people who come for working or for do anything, but if they come from a third national country, so developing countries, not the global north, this is a reason for introducing a crisis. The second word very much used is politicization. And here I give you some example from Italy, but not just Italy. Salvini, that I think you know, it's a minister at that time. It has been Minister of Interior, now it's minister, but in another infrastructure, another area, said many times, non siamo il campo profughi d'Europa, which means we are not Europe's refugee camp, meaning exactly what I was saying before, everybody arrive in Italy, we have to sustain the burden of immigration alone, anyone help us, Europe is far away, we can't go on in this way. And of course, if people in media, in public debate are continuously exposed to this kind of discourse, and maybe they see some refugees in their city, and sometimes they are really doing nothing because they are hosted in some very in places with a really low quality of life, and so they are in some way forced not to do nothing, and they think, okay, it's true. We are the campo profughi d'Europa, and we are invaded by refugees. It's true, Salvini is right. And it leads to a lot of politicization. So when you talk about immigration, first of all, it's a crisis. Second, you have to politicize this issue, which means that the next election, migration is always in the first position in the debate. And many elections really where the victory was really much related to the position on immigration by the different parties. Another statement, which is very, I think, familiar, and that it produce politicization, is migrants steal our jobs. It's incredible that we can think this kind of things, because it's really so not true. It's the contrary, that they give us some jobs, that give some services, that we can do just with people, native people. But it's produced politicization, because people can think, oh, there is a very high level of unemployment, and we take people from abroad. We don't need people from abroad. We need to stay who we are now, because we need to have more jobs. If they come from abroad, they steal our jobs. Another is immigrants bring terrorism and insecurity. This kind of statement has been very much used since the 2001 attacks in the USA, and since then we always associate immigrants also with terrorism, especially if immigrants are with a Muslim background. And finally, a more general statement that usually people use when they want to say, I'm not racist, but. I'm not racist, but immigration makes Europe lose its cultural roots. But which are the cultural roots of Europe? Anyone know exactly? Why immigrants cannot be considered as part of the cultural roots? We don't know exactly. So also these sentences reveal that we are ignorant of what's happened before, and they are used just for in some way convince people to vote, not just to vote from a specific orientation, which is the right-wing populist party, but also to become very much selfish and to think, which is even more important, to think that you can be self-sufficient, but it's impossible. To welcome, to receive immigrants is not just an issue of to be generous. No, that's important. But it's not the only reason. The reason that we need to have open society because we are not self-sufficient, especially now that the level of fertility is so incredibly low. Finally, this is a more articulated concept, more theoretical, and it's the policy failure. But if you take in bracket policy, you can say the failure. So usually we note an apparent mismatch between the goals that policymakers have about immigration. The goals usually are not having immigration, blocking immigration, and the outcomes, because irregular immigration still exists, even in the USA. And so the idea is that immigration policies usually fail. Even here, it's a kind of half true, because every policy has some failure. Every kind of policy, think about the policy against the pollution, but the urban policy, sometimes this policy fails because it's not so easy to reach the set goals. But in immigration, given that there is this public discourse about crisis and politicization, the failure seems higher than in other areas. And policy failure, for example, has this kind of thesis: states are unable to control migration as they would want and declare. Actually, this kind of statement was quite true some years ago, but with the new strict, rigid, and technological way in which now European Union is going to implement the border controls, is not so true, because now borders control is really effective. And that's, I don't know if a good thing. And so the failure, at least the failures related to the access of people, is not so really a failure. They really manage quite well to control migrants. But policy failure in itself could undermine the state legitimacy, authority, and capacity. So if the public opinion thinks that government, the state, is unable to control migration, they could think that it's unable to defend the sovereignty of the state itself. So it is considered a very important topic. I just tell you that public policy as a discipline, more than a discipline, field of study, was born in the USA after the Second World War in 1950, and then it arrived in Europe later. It is part of the political science. It's a kind of subsector of the political science. And the reason why it became so studied is that the scholars in policy analysis were not satisfied by the explanation of the classical political science, who said that politics, which is the conflict between one party and another in order to have the consensus of the people and finally to win the election, basically. They thought that the idea that politics was everything and was always the most important things was not satisfying. And they said that you have also to look to the policies, because sometimes the concrete topics, the concrete issues that are done by politicians in some way have an influence also on the politics, so on this kind of conflict in order to have the consensus. So basically they said it's really important that you also look really in depth on the policies, not just on the politics. And that's the reason because this field of study developed. Maybe you can see better this argument looking at the definition. One of the classical definitions is from Thomas Dye in 1972, and he said that public policy is whatever governments choose to do or not to do, and it's important also with this not to do. So it's very simple, but there is a lot in this definition, because everything that governments choose to do in every kind of field, it's a public policy. At the same time, if they decide not to do nothing, and there is a problem, but they decide not to do nothing, it's a public policy, even this. So action and inaction are both public policy. The choice not to do nothing is the choice, it's a public policy choice. In the second definition that I want to show to you, there is something more. So we add something more because James Anderson states that public policy is a purposive course of action followed by an actor or set of actors in dealing with the problem or matter of concern. What is more than the difference, what he adds to the definition of Thomas Dye is that here you don't have just the government, but Anderson say an actor or a set of actors. So you can see, and for now it's clear for us that it's not just the governments that do the policies, but also other actors, private actors, for-profit actors, unions, NGOs, and corporations, all these kind of actors contribute in public policy. Even if the final decision is by the governments, okay, in the parliaments or in the city council or in the regional council or in the commission on the European Parliament, but a lot of different actors push for some decision. And the second point, as you can see here, is that actor and the set of actors are engaged in dealing with a problem. That's very important. When we talk about a public policy, we talk about a problem which is somewhere in there, and that at a certain point, the government decides to take care of it. So the public policy exists if there is a problem which is recognized as a public problem, not an individual problem just for one people or few people, but a problem that can be recognized as a problem of many people, a city or a neighborhood, and could be municipal public policy, a nation, a continent, and so on. And it's important to have this in mind. Public policy follow a problem, which arose and that government recognizes important to solve. The government could also say, okay, there's this problem, there is a high level of poverty in my country, okay, no problem, we go on. Okay, and they choose not to do nothing. But the problem was there and they didn't decide to do nothing. Okay, it's clear? So that's another definition which in some way took together the different perspectives. I read it briefly. Public policy is a series of coherent decisions or activities taken or carried out by different public and sometimes private actors whose resources, institutional likes and interests vary, with the view to resolving in a targeted manner a problem, which is politically defined as collective in nature. So another important point is that the definition of the problem is political in nature. And so how do you define immigration? Immigration is a problem, is an issue. But how do you define this issue? That's a political choice. And it depends on the people who are in charge of the government or European Union or whatever. So if they define immigrants a problem of security, a problem of because it's a burden for the welfare state. The flows of decision that will be put in place will be accordingly, of course. No way that could be in another way. If the problem is defined as something that can enrich our society, can do a contribution to our culture, the policies have a different perspective. So which is a public problem? A public problem is a situation which is judged politically as problematic. And important to this adjective or adverb, politically, I mean, something could be a problem, but not be recognized by a problem in the political sphere. But it's still a problem. But the difference between a public problem, who is an object of public policy, and a public problem, which is not an object of a public policy, is if the government take it on charge and do something. Here you have some example. The existence of an elevated level of carbon dioxide emissions that represent a threat to climate stability, that could be a problem, but it has to be recognized in order to do something about it. Or the high frequency of acts of violence in urban areas, or the massive influx of refugees at borders. These are events, the way in which governments take these events into consideration, and if they transform they in some decision or not, it's a political action. Just to give you another example, the definition of a public problem really varies in times and in spaces. And for example, think about homosexuality, which was considered a problem in a certain way 100 years ago. It was a crime, even in Europe. And now it's still defined as a problem, but usually, not always and not everywhere, in the sense that we have to protect the right of people, homosexual people. So see how the definition of problem really changes. But if you see the same topic, homosexuality, not in European Union country, but in another part of the world, they still define a crime. And homosexuality is also a reason for obtaining the refugee status here in Europe. So here you can see how the definition of a problem is really so relevant and crucial. And the difference between social problem and public problem, a problem can exist but cannot be recognized as a problem, and so it remains a social problem in the air. And maybe some private actors try to do something about this problem. I think, for example, of people, refugees, people coming nowadays in Italy, they don't receive reception because many reasons that I'm not telling you, and public reception as they have the right to receive, and some NGOs give them some reception at their expenses. A public problem is a social problem which make the jump to a political acknowledgement. But still we don't know which kind of definition can be done about this problem. And then who are the policy actors? That's important because public policy are made by different actors, not just the policymaker. Of course, they are very important, but they are also, we can distinguish here between public and private actors, which is a very general definition, but could be enough for this course. So you can have we have the political administrative sphere, the public actors, where are included politicians, so the people elected who are in a public arena, like parliament, city council, and so on. And then you have the bureaucracy, which are also very much relevant, also in the political decision, because they have a very important resource. Do you know which is the resource that they have? The bureaucracy that often the politicians do not have. They have the skills. They know very well the mechanisms. They know very well the topics. Sometimes a policymaker, a politician become minister, and until the day before, he or she didn't know almost nothing about the topic, or not so much, or if not about the topic, the mechanisms, the way in which the things are done. The bureaucracy are there, I mean, for 10, 15, or maybe more years. They have an historical memory. They know everything, all the mechanisms, and they have a power in this sense, because they can, for example, say, oh, this cannot be done. Oh, no, it's impossible. You can't do it. And if you don't have the skills, you don't know if it's true or not. You are very much dependent on this expertise. So there is a collaboration between bureaucracy and politicians, but there could be also some competition, because the bureaucracy want to maintain their power. And the private actors include many different actors. The general said private organizations. So we have unions and corporations, but also the non-governmental organizations that in Italy we call third sector organizations. We also have journalists. I mean, more and more also the media become part of this debate, and also part of the public, part of the policy process, of the process who contribute to build a public policy, because they can influence people, for example, in the way of voting or in the way of thinking about things. I would say that in the field of immigration, sometimes journalists didn't do the best to communicate in the right way, in equilibrated way, what's happened about immigration. They, in some way, follow some statement, some way of thinking, which was maybe spectacular, but not always true. And finally, we can consider part of the policy process also the civil society, generally intended, and even the single citizens. When we as single citizens go in a square and we protest, as happens last year in San Sebastiano, maybe some of you was part of this protest against the war in Israel and Palestine. There was an occupation of San Sebastiano, and this was made by single students, not necessarily part of a structured organization. It was a kind of spontaneous organization, and it's a political act with the aim of raise a problem and to take this problem to the public attention. So even the single citizens can be part of the policy process, even if, of course, we understand that they don't have the same power of the policymaker. So I show you the policy cycle. I think it's quite important to have in mind this figure, also to translate this figure to the topic of immigration. When we talk about public policy, we need to have in mind that public policy is a process. It's not something that happens now and here, and you don't have to see what's happened in the past and what will happen in the future. It is a process, sometimes very, very long, and scholars decided to divide the process in these different steps or phases. When scholars and scientists make this kind of categorization, we know that it's a kind of simplification of the reality. Reality is more complex, and sometimes these phases or steps overlap one another, but it's useful for us to have this kind of categorization. So usually a public policy starts from the setting of the agenda when the problem arises to the public attention and when it is included in a political agenda. So when, for example, the parliament decides that a problem become one of the points of the agenda in the next council of the minister. In the agenda setting, the question is what public problem shall we work on before decide to select a problem. So you see a different problem around you. Imagine that you are a policymaker. You have a lot of inputs, a lot of problems. You can't maybe deal with everything, so you select. What kind of problem do I select? And when I select this problem, which kind of definition do I make about this problem? The second step is the policy formulation, and here the answer is what possible solutions we can develop. So in this phase, policymakers try to find some possibility in order to solve the problem as they are defined, this problem. And these solutions have to be put in a decisional arena, which we call policy selection or decision-making moment, when one of these solutions or some of these solutions are taken, and this process of decision-making has some specific venue, could be a parliament or a city council, so a place where you can vote. And when this decision is taken, it starts a very interesting process, which is the process of the implementation. This process is very interesting because sometimes the decisions that were decided at the political level reveal not so effective in practice. It's maybe impossible to implement, or the resources foreseen are not enough, or some kind of conflict emerges between actors at a different level. Maybe the decision is at the national level, but the implementation is at the local level, and municipalities or the regions start to claim with the national level because they can't do what the states want that they do, and something like that. Another important problem in the implementation is the coordination. To implement a policy needs that a lot of different actors coordinate between them, and it's not easy, and sometimes there is a kind of conflict or redundancy. Too many people do one thing, and maybe anybody do another thing which is necessary to be done. And there are really a lot of study about the failure in policy implementation. And when we will talk about the Ukrainian case, I will present a study that I've done with a colleague of mine about the reception of Ukrainian refugees in 2022. And finally, there is the last step of the public policy, which is the evaluation. Evaluation is the moment when you have to compare the goals stated at the beginning of the policy and what the policy really obtained. So you have to compare the output that you implemented with the outcomes that you had in mind. And it's the moment when you see if what you have done, what you have decided really worked or not. I stop here for this lesson, and I see you tomorrow.